the US is debating how and what energy to build, the rest of the world is already outpacing us, namely China. China adds more than 8 times the power capacity than the US in a world where power is increasing and you need reliable, cheap power, whether you're going to do AI, data centers, onshoring, bringing manufacturing back. What is a key component of that? It's power. If we're not competitive from a power perspective, then our goods and services are going to cost more.
Welcome to the Blue Ocean Solutions Podcast, where we dive into real conversations with business owners, innovators, and industry leaders reshaping the future of clean tech, construction, and the renewable energy sectors. I'm Kreel Hutchinson, your host. Our guest today is Nathan Jovanelly, the founder and CEO of SunRaise Capital in the Florida area. We're going to discuss his innovative approach to scaling residential solar by aligning capital, technology, and long-term ownership, and how his company is rapidly growing by fulfilling a capital gap in the marketplace. If you're a renewable energy investor, solar installer, or a founder in the clean tech space, you will love this show because Nate shares how he built $1 million business with a lean team by solving fundamental industry bottlenecks through strategic innovation and the power of AI. It's an example of how to create a massive impact and drive rapid growth in a complex marketplace. Welcome to the podcast, Nate.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. I was really looking forward to this conversation. We've had a wide range of people in the solar industry on here, but I think your perspective and your company is going to be very unique for our audience. So for people that may not be familiar with you, your company, and your work, why don't you do a little introduction of yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I've spent the last decade in residential solar finance, working with large institutions, deploying billions of dollars into the space. So folks like BlackRock, Ares, Basalt. And the biggest thing I learned is the industry doesn't have a demand problem. It has an alignment problem. So SunRaise is solving that by building the infrastructure that connects capital, installers, and homeowners all in one cohesive ecosystem. And we make that possible so people can own and scale residential solar as a true asset class and not just like a one-off transaction, so that we can scale the business to meet the growing energy demands in the US.
Perfect. You know, that little introduction touches on so many important factors, so I want to dive a little bit more into it. But let's start with the basics. So tell me a little bit more about SunRaise Capital. How long have you been involved? How did you start the company? Where are you guys currently at?
So we're about 3 years in. So we started in May of 23. We initiated the company or formed the company. Prior to that, I had a couple different roles. Like I said, about a decade, I started a large, what we call TPO or third-party ownership, which is a lease or power purchase agreement. So I started a company called IGS Solar, which was a sister company to the largest privately held retail energy provider in the US, or the largest energy company really. And did that for about 10 years. I left there. I did some consulting for large installers, trying to solve their needs. Again, it's this misalignment concept of they wanted to be part of funds or part of the transaction where they could have some long-term ownership in either the tax or just the cash flow of the assets. So that was a common theme. And I did some consulting, and I also was an executive at a large software company, a SaaS company that did billions of dollars. I think my last year there, they did $4 billion of residential loans. And so the opposite of a lease, just like you can lease or get a loan for a car, same with solar. So that gave me a lot of well-rounded experience, but I've always thought that, in my opinion, that third-party ownership is more efficient for a homeowner for a variety of reasons. Mostly it comes down just to the financial engineering behind it. And what we wanted to solve was, when I was working at IGS, again, besides the misalignment problem, in order to invest in solar, there was a minimum check size. I think we did some of the smallest funds at the time in the country for residential. They're $150 million, right? So that really severely limits your pool of capital. That's one. Two, tax equity was always a constraint. And there's been some changes in recent legislation and others with tax credit transferability and all these different things that now enable solar to be more of an asset class. So in other words, anyone could come and benefit from owning solar assets. So that's the system we set up. You can think of it as like lease in a box. We do everything from intake of the lead to embedded rate of return guardrails, because there's all these different things that fluctuate based on every project, how much it's going to produce, what the rate is, the size, so on and so forth. So we manage all of that, but then the whole way through QA/QC, which is something that we do that I don't think any other software platform does. And then eventually to asset management. So you can truly come say, hey, I want to deploy $10 million of capital in the space, and we can pull all of that together with contracts, everything for that particular investor to invest into solar as an asset class.
And then you manage it for them long term. I think your experience is so unique. And if I could sum it up so that I'm accurate here, being like, okay, you have a really great understanding of energy, particularly in the renewable space, but you also have a great understanding of capital, how funds and capital and that all moves. And then you also have this understanding of SaaS and software in the space. So I think you bring all three of those together. That really seems to be the foundation of the value proposition that SunRaise is putting forward here.
Yeah, I mean, by trade, I was a chemical engineer. I always had an interest in renewables. I remember doing a report in college. I went to University of Delaware. I took one of the first green technology classes that they offered as a technical elective, and we didn't get many electives, so anything outside the norm was great. And I did my report on PV versus solar thermal, and concluded that solar thermal is a better technology. That's how long ago it was. But I've always had an interest in cleaner, cheaper, faster to deploy energy sources. And that's what naturally, pulled me in. Is just kind of serendipitous how I got here, because I was working as a consultant at various customers. I worked at, which is now it's Leidos now, but at the time it was SAIC. So I had consulted for everything from Harley Davidson to Mott's Applesauce to NASA were clients of mine. And more on the infrastructure, civil engineer, permitting, but it cracked the door to get me into environmental. And then I went to an infrastructure company and ran a team of engineers across the US, and eventually found my way to IGS through some connections. And it was a great opportunity. But when we started the business, I actually got hired with a few other people to start a combined heat and power business, because it's a gas company, right? And I think there's a lot of merit to that. There's so many moving parts. And you also are tying your energy price to commodity, which you can only hedge out for 3 years, which solar's a 25-year hedge. And I don't know what you're seeing, but I think that energy prices are rising so fast in this country that we're going to see more and more solar adoption, like what you would see in California or Hawaii.
Well, I would agree with you. The current global scenario with, troubles in the Middle East and a war is definitely obviously bringing oil prices up. But I think it's part of even just a larger trend. I don't think energy is going to get cheaper over the long haul, especially with the demand that AI has. So bringing in solar, which offsets that in such an amazing way. I think the best part of solar is still ahead of us. With that being the foundation of you and your work in the world, why don't you tell us a little bit about the big picture of what you see with the industry, what trends are working against your business or the industry in general, and what's working for you? Give us a kind of the lay of the land from a high level point of view.
Yeah, it's a great segue. So just kind of anchoring back to rising prices, because that's what this ties into. So for 15 years, the electricity demand in the US barely moved. And now it's accelerating rapidly, driven mostly by AI, data centers, electrification. It's kind of become a little mainstream now, right? In the past, these were things no one talked about because energy prices were generally pretty flat. But if you look at, I post a lot on this on LinkedIn, and I just posted an article the other day that makes a credible argument that in Texas, there are scenarios where power prices could jump close to 80% just in the next few years. Like, we're not talking a decade, like through 2027. And then if you take, say, PJM, for instance, which is the largest wholesale electricity market, it used to be Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, but now it's 13 states through the Mid-Atlantic, Midwest. We're seeing a ton of price pressure on them where they can't literally get capacity online fast enough. So this isn't a warning sign, it's a signal to build. And what you're seeing is demand is growing faster than supply, so prices are rising. And that's exactly how markets do. There should be no shock here. It's simple supply and demand economics. So in my view, the only real solution is to build more generation faster, right? So then we talk about, okay, whether the administration's pro-nuclear or pro-coal or whatever, how are you going to get that power online when we need it? Because this is happening now. It's not, again, a 10-year problem. And to get a gas turbine or to permit a nuclear facility, even if you fast track it, I mean, you're talking about a decade generally, right? So and also you have the issue of not in my backyard, right? Like it sounds great until you go put this thing. And I actually grew up next to TMI, like 3 Mile Island. Literally, I could see the smokestacks from my trailer where I grew up. So I totally understand that perspective, especially after there was, the largest meltdown in the U.S. At that location. I think my point is that solar right now in the U.S. has accounted for more than 50% of all new power capacity in the U.S. specifically. And it's been like that for a number of years now. And when you include storage, wind, other renewable type supporting cast, then we're over 90% is coming from those technologies. And we need to figure out ways to accelerate that because it's the fastest way to get power online. Instead, there seems to be this constant battle or tug of war back and forth between just politically, it's a political football, right? And I do believe largely it's bipartisan, and there's interesting data on that. But my main point is we need the power. There's not really another near-term solution. So we should be going all in on getting the cheapest, fastest in terms of coming online, available power online as fast as possible.
I 100% agree with you. And I love that you bring the facts to the show. For our audience, we would be familiar with this type of dialogue because many of our guests have also stated that. Also, a repeating theme of like all hands on deck, that it really is unfair or not appropriate for any administration to be choosing winners or losers when all of these demands are actually needed right now. So let's just see what each industry, each vertical is able to produce. And obviously, based on the numbers and the facts that you presented, solar is so well positioned and the technology is getting better and better and the price is coming down. And battery storage is significantly better where it was 10 years ago. So the options are so much more significant of what's possible. How does SunRaise Capital step into that lay of the land and really put forward a value proposition to move the needle forward?
China adds more than 8 times the power capacity than the US every year. So example, last year, China added a mind-boggling 429 gigawatts of new capacity. So no one needs to know exactly how to conceptualize that. Just know that the US added 51 gigawatts, right? So in a world where power is increasing and you need reliable, cheap power, whether you're going to do AI data centers, onshoring, bringing manufacturing back, what is a key component of that? It's power. If we're not competitive from a power perspective, then our goods and services are going to cost more because in manufacturing, one of the biggest costs is inevitably power consumption. So again, if you want to go now, I'll start bringing this back down to answer your question. So I'll try not to be too long-winded here. But if you look at just 2023 alone, China added 217 gigawatts of solar, which is more than double the total solar that the US has installed cumulatively up to 2023. So not only are they 8 times us, they're 4 times everything we bring on just for solar. And they're not just building solar, they're building wind and coal and all of these things. So my point is, if the energy becomes the bottleneck for AI, manufacturing growth, then the countries who are going to build it the fastest win. And right now, the U.S. is supply constrained. And when you're supply constrained, prices go up. So what does SunRaise do? I wanted to set the stage with that on the global scale, because what we're trying to do is make it more efficient for homeowners. We're trying to be more transparent. We show them what their real-time savings is. And I think up until really the last year, this hasn't really been mainstream because our energy prices were very low outside of as I mentioned earlier, California and Hawaii. Why do they have such high solar adoption? Because you pay 50 cents a kilowatt hour for power. If anyone else, any other state had 50 cents a kilowatt hour, which we're getting there in the Northeast, then you're going to see higher adoption of solar, right? I mean, Florida is a strong market. Texas is a strong market. Why? Because our rates are increasing. Here in Florida, FPL had the largest rate increase in US history. And I just gave you the stat on Texas. That's going to drive more adoption. And what I think SunRaise is positioning ourselves to be, again, is that not only the central alignment layer to put all these guardrails in place to make sure the capital is protected, they get their return that they're expecting, the installer is protected, they're getting paid on time, that the homeowner is protected, they're getting the savings and quality they were promised, right? That's what we're doing, but we're preparing to get to the early majority because we're not there as a country yet. Because like I said, it hasn't really been in the psyche of the American consumer, like, oh, my power bill is $100, $150, and it's not something they thought about. Now it's getting to the point where it's $200-$300, even for a modest size home, depending on obviously where you are in the country. People are starting to pay attention. Where I think the industry could have been better getting ahead of this narrative. When I say the industry, just solar, renewable, whatever, getting more homeowners involved, like this is naturally going to happen because we just talked about why, we're falling behind on generation, which is going to create less supply, but demand is going up at an unprecedented rate. So prices are going to go up. And now people are going to look at that and they're going to say, okay, now this is painful. This hurts to pay this bill. And really we're competing against the utility. So our job here is to make it prepare for when people shift from being sold solar, right now you're sold solar, to actually buying solar. We're going to wake up thinking, hey, my energy bill is really high. I'm going to look into solar. Where can I go buy it? That doesn't really happen. Most people, again, they click on a link and they get 30 different phone calls, or somebody knocks on their door and asks them how they feel about their utility bill, something to that effect. So we're not quite in that early majority yet. I mean, again, just another interesting stat. We talk about Florida as one of the top states now for solar and new capacity, but there's more housing starts than solar projects every year. So technically residential solar is going backwards. So again, I just think there's so much more opportunity and room, and it's going to be the natural progression of things as people start adopting solar at scale.
Interesting. You bring up a lot of good points there. I want to get a little deeper into what has been the hesitation of homeowners up until this point of moving towards, like, maybe they're inspired with the idea, they see the vision, they're not feeling it, in their bill, in their accounts yet. You're suggesting, hey, that's coming. We can just see what the trend is. But what has been the hesitation for most homeowners in getting in early into residential solar?
I mean, I think there's always phases of any new technology. Like I was listening to a podcast today. I don't remember what it was actually. It was a podcast my older son got me into. It's interesting. It's called the Iced Coffee Hour, and they had an economist on, and he was talking about the first time he saw a high definition TV. Right, most people are probably too young to remember that experience, but it's like, wow, this is like looking through a window. But it was $10,000 at the time. People couldn't afford it, right? So you have your early adopters, and it's the same with every industry. So said differently, solar was what, $7 a watt, $7.50 a watt. Maybe in California you could break even, and certainly there are people because they did it because they wanted to be first, or it was cool, or it was environmentally driven, not economically driven. So that's why I say solar's bipartisan, because there's some cool studies out there where they can see who has solar on their roof and then look up by address and see how they vote. And what you'll find is it's amazingly 50-50 in the political spectrum between Democrats and Republicans. And I think, again, driving the point, it's just different reasons, right? So some people are going to adopt it for the green aspect, and they're going to be the first in, and that's how technologies start going. But really, for the early majority, we need to do two things. As an industry, we haven't done a great job educating homeowners. Like I said, solar sold, it's not bought. So that's one. And most people, too, don't change behavior until they feel pain. And right now they're feeling the pain as electricity prices rise, and it's becoming very real. I mean, I remember having this conversation with my brother-in-law because my in-laws put solar on their house probably about 6-7 years ago. We were in Pennsylvania at the time, which is a pretty inexpensive market because there's a lot of gas and coal and things like that, nuclear. They're like, we're going to save $20 a month, but we don't care. We think it's cool. It's, save the planet and we get to save some money. Perfect. Now they're saving like $80 to $100 a month just in that 6-year time frame because energy prices are rising so rapidly. So you're going to see legacy people who are stoked with their systems and they're probably going to do upgrades to get more capacity. And then you're going to see new people that are going, wait a second, you're saving $100 a month? Like, now that's compelling. And what I can't say is exactly where's that line. I think it's different for everybody, right? For some people, that's not enough savings. For others, it's more than enough. And we'll find out where that is. But I do know that if power costs 50 cents a kilowatt hour throughout the country, you can just look at the two places where that is occurring, California and Hawaii, and you can see their solar adoptions, far surpasses any other state. It's not even close. And I think that trend will continue. It's emerging into a mature market. And again, I think the full transition will happen when people are shopping actively for solar.
When you talk about being sold versus buying, a question that I have, maybe just more of like getting really clear on the valuation that you have and the proposition that you have. So in the past, I would understand that homeowners would be buying the asset, like having to put forward 30, 50, $80,000 to buy the in full installation, have it installed. They become the owner. With SunRaise Capital, that transition shifts where now the investor is the asset owner, the homeowner is leasing it. So that upfront cost has significantly disappeared. Now it's on a zero. Okay. Zero. And now they're on a lease. So in my opinion, you've removed the biggest obstacle, which is that upfront cost. Now you're comparing the lease to the bills. And if it's at a lower cost, then this makes sense moving forward. Is that the idea of re-educating homeowners from this being sold to like buying because the model has shifted with what you're presenting?
I think yes and no. So I think when I say it's sold, it's most sales still come, believe it or not, door-to-door sales, right? And the demographic for solar is naturally going to be older, like probably 55 plus. I don't know exactly, but most of our funds are above that. Why? Because those are established people that own homes. I always say this, the biggest barrier to residential solar, to owning solar, whether you're leasing or you buy it, is home ownership, which is getting harder and harder. Millennials and the younger generation are putting off home ownership longer and longer. Once they own homes, I don't know about you, my kids aren't opening the door for anyone. Like, their phone rings, it's one of their friends, right? Like, they're not taking a phone call from an unknown number. They FaceTime. They don't even generally call. So point is, they're the ones that are going to buy online. They buy everything online, right? So I think that's part of the timing gap here. But yeah, there's some other underlying things. So loans used to dominate the market. Loans in 2020 were 80% of the market, certainly over 70. I don't know the exact stat, but it's somewhere in that range. Why? What happened in 2020? We had literally historic low, basically 0% interest rates. So debt's free. You might as well go buy solar. You finance it with a large solar loan company, and then you get the tax credit as the homeowner. So you get some cash back in your pocket. And then you're hopefully saving money month over month. In other words, your loan payment's less than what your electricity payment was, right? So fast forward, last year, the one big beautiful bill eliminated the tax credit for homeowners. So now there's a 30% federal investment tax credit. So if your system was, $50,000, or let's use 30,000, it's easier number. If it was $30,000, you were going to get $10,000 back. You no longer get that. So now leases are seeing an uptick because if somebody else owns the system, the corporate tax code wasn't changed. There's two different sections. So they can not only take the tax credit, which most of our systems are 40% because we use domestic content. It's a whole nother rabbit hole, but there's all these adders, but you could get 40% federal investment tax credit, and then you get 100% accelerator bonus depreciation that's came back in the BBB. So leases now have a better value prop. As you said, it's zero money out of pocket. You don't have to worry about anything. You don't maintain it. You don't have any of that risk. And your ROI is effectively infinite because you're getting savings from day one. All of our systems, so we have pricing logic by utility that makes sure that the customer's saving 10 to 20% minimum day one, because again, we're competing against the utility. And if as a lease provider, if somebody else owns the system and they're charging you for more for power than what the utility is, then you have incentive not to pay, because what's the alternative? You shut off the system and they get their power cheaper from the utility. So what we're trying to do is make sure there's always savings there for the customer. And that's more of a reality in third-party ownership than it would be in a loan. Loan, you're basically underwriting the individual because they have their credit and score and all of that. For a lease, you're underwriting the asset. How well is the asset? Is it going to perform? So on and so forth, because that's what the underlying investor is going to own. Those are the differences as I see it. I think there's merits to both. I really do. I mean, and there's people that I know, like, and trust that we debate all the time if loans or leases are better. I mean, right now, leases are certainly better, hands down, because of the financial engineering in the background. And that will continue for at least through 2027, really through 2030, barring any other policy changes. At that point, my long-term outlook, like going into the future, is that energy prices are going to increase so much that the tax credit will be less and less relevant. It's not going to be an economic driver anymore, because again, if the average utility price in the US is 20 cents a kilowatt hour, there's enough savings there without the tax credit, and costs generally come down in solar. Like, we're at a weird time now with domestic content rules, and there's another thing called fiat compliance, which is basically you can't have stuff made in China and get the tax credit. Effectively, it's oversimplification, but those things do increase prices. That being said, the greatest cost in residential solar and in most solar, frankly, is the customer acquisition cost. So if you have a 30% CAC, customer acquisition cost, because you're paying the sales rep, the 1099, the whatever that's going door to door to get these leads, and there's all these different stacks. There's marketing. You're trying to get someone to click a Facebook ad, whatever it is. If you can remove that 30% customer acquisition cost, then the tax credit right now is less relevant. And I think that's the transition I'm looking for. Is energy prices are so much pain. Energy prices are so high that people are naturally going to go find a solution. They're going to get educated on solar, find that solar is a good solution. It's no money out of pocket, saves money immediately. It's long-term price hedge against the utility, which in this environment, again, is increasing at a pretty rapid pace. And that gap alone is enough, I think, to drive the US to higher solar adoption. Because one question I get all the time is, why is solar so cheap in Australia? It's $1.50 or whatever a watt, where here the average is probably $3.50. It's customer acquisition costs. They have a much higher adoption rate, and they don't rely on any marketing. Everyone's calling their local solar installer effectively to get, again, oversimplification, but that's really what's going on.
Well, you make a very strong theory of the case, and it makes a lot of sense. A couple questions for you. So on the SunRaise Capital side, you guys have clearly been in some great growth. So your theory of the case is actually being proven all through the market acquisition. What technology has played to help you enable this rapid growth? And what are some of the biggest, probably operational challenges you face with a small team to implement and keep up with this growth pace?
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, like everyone else, at the same time we're talking about AI increasing utility costs, it's also fundamentally changing how fast the industry can move, right? And I think you talked about this on your last podcast with Andrew Dunn, and you had mentioned that you had a mentor that said success loves speed. So in other words, AI can compress timelines, increase velocity, and make business more efficient. Not only our business, but the installers. It can educate homeowners, right? All of that increases throughput, drives down cost. So if you think about just from a super high level, what used to take days or certainly hour to do, we can do in seconds. Like, AI can generate accurate system designs basically instantly with actual real data to the point where it's institutional approved, it's bankable, it's reliant. So that's one thing. You can analyze utility bills in seconds to make sure that proposals to a homeowner are grounded in reality. Like, yes, this is the correct system size. We're not going to overbuild your system. Yes, you're going to save X because this is your new rate and here's what you were paying. And then I think more importantly is, like I said, on the leasing side, you're underwriting the asset. So people are shocked when they find out that it can take upwards of an hour a person manually to review a system. It's effectively a desktop review. And we look at 100% of systems, not 99%, 100%. Every system that is sold and installed, we review for quality assurance, and it can be upwards of 150 photos that we have to sift through. So leveraging AI to do calculations based on, is the main service panel overloaded? Was even some basic, was this installed correctly? Are there photos missing? Even putting the photos in the same order so you don't have to put that burden back on the installer, having that capability can drastically increase your throughput. And the cheaper that we can do quality assurance, then the lower the cost of solar is going to be. And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? That's what drives adoption. High energy costs from the utility, relatively lower solar cost. And now people are going to have more and more interest in solar, and we need to make sure that we can scale into that without increasing OpEx to the point where we start inflating the cost beyond what it needs to be. So in summary, it's AI is driving demand on one side through data centers, but it's also solving some of the bottlenecks on the supply side by compressing the entire life cycle of a project. And that's exactly what we need as solar adoption moves into the mainstream.
Do you think it also plays a role in reducing the capital acquisition costs?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Because if you have, I think education is a big part of it, right? It's first, you need that pain signal. That's what gets people interested. But now you got to educate them. Like, I'll be honest with you. Like I said, I was an engineer. Before I worked for a retail energy provider, I had no idea how this stuff worked. One of my first questions when I started at IGS was, hey, I got a question for you. Pennsylvania just turned into what we referred to as a choice market, meaning you can pick your energy supplier. Because utilities, I guess I'll have to add this layer for the audience. Utilities are regulated monopolies. They don't make money on the sale of power. They can't. They only make money on the distribution of power, right? So I would get these letters literally weekly from Pennsylvania Power and Light, PPL. Hey, you need to find a new energy supplier. Why don't you find a new energy supplier? So I walk into IGS the first time, I'm like, can somebody answer me why the utility's trying to kick me off? It's because they don't make any money on it. I mean, there's some other regulatory stuff there too, but when you have a choice market, there's retail energy providers that buy that power, that go into auctions, they try and secure it more for less money so they can pass that on to the consumer. So that's generally how these energy markets work. But again, how many people actually know full circle what a kilowatt hour is, right? Or understand why they have some states, you're on the utility and they're not choice markets. Texas is the only fully deregulated market, for instance. So there's all these, like Florida's not deregulated, so you're still on the bill here. Effectively what that means is the utility, without much economic incentive, is going and buying that power on your behalf, and then just marking it up whatever they're allowed within their constraints. So it's not real free market. Where if you look at like New Jersey or New York or Pennsylvania, Ohio, a lot of markets like that, they're these choice markets, or Texas is a good example, where it's fully deregulated to the point where the utility is actually on the retail energy provider's bill. So that's my long-winded saying that most people don't understand what a kilowatt hour is or how it works. But they do understand is what their utility bill is. So it's an education.
I think where you're uniquely positioned right now, because you see you understand the industry. You also see seeing into the future. It's like, hey, I'm putting two to two together. I see what's happening. And now there's this gap. And I think education will serve a role in really helping homeowners stop being sold to and they start to buy. This transition that you've been hinting at throughout this conversation is both from when they feel a pain point, but there's also education and awareness growing that they start to reach out proactively. So with that being the foundation, as we move towards the finish line of this podcast, I want to get your perspective on the future. In the next 6 to 12 months, what's the strategic priorities for you guys?
Yeah, I think the way I would summarize it is we don't need to convince the public that the future is electric. It's already happening. I mean, look at the electrification of the grid and just the amount of EVs that are on the road compared to, 5 years ago. The real question is whether we can build the infrastructure fast enough to support it. And I think the winners in the space are going to be the ones who figure out how to deploy capital and energy at scale, not the ones that are talking about it, the ones that are doing it. So when I started a business, I'm thinking, I'm sick of waiting around for someone else to solve this problem. I see what the problem is. I know what the need is. I have the solution. I'm just going to go build it myself. And that's exactly what we did. So I think we're going to focus on continuing to find other capital. I think the market's largely capital constrained right now, meaning there's more people that even want solar than capital. There's certainly, in terms of installers, it's an issue. So I think innovative sources of capital. I like the idea of something I've been passionate about is expanding the FICO bucket, because I've seen through the data personally and called literally hundreds of customers in my career that FICO is not really indicative of payment. At some point it is, right? At some point it's so low that those people just have an issue paying anything. But generally speaking, I see just as many defaults above 700 as below 700, because you're selling now as the market shifts is based on saving, right? So we're focused on continually simplifying the process, educating consumers so that when this transition happens, and it's going to happen, I don't know exactly when, but it's going to happen, that we have a world-class direct-to-consumer platform with enough capital to support the growth. So I would say in summary, that's what we're focused on.
Hey, a follow-up question to that. So on the FICO score, would that be something you would then negotiate potentially with your investors and say, hey, based on our data, let's open this up a little bit more, that maybe traditionally wouldn't have gotten approved, but we're looking at these other variables and we think this is a good fit. So those are inward conversations you can have with investors to get the green light?
Yep. And we do that right now. All of our, what we refer to as our bespoke funds, generally go down to a 600 FICO. I'd say most institutional is between, right now, it was traditionally always 650. Now it's upwards of 680. And it just depends on the capital behind it. Excuse me. So we're trying to solve that need. And we find that, our default rate statistically is just as strong as, solar is a good asset if you're saving money. Very low default rates. It's backed by an asset that produces something, power that people need. And what we find is, if you build the system correctly, properly set, that's QA/QC, properly set expectations on the front end of how long it's going to take, and deliver on what you promise, those customers are going to pay, because their alternative is to pay more to the utility. And that's not a good alternative. Everyone needs power, right? Imagine, I don't know if you've ever been through like a hurricane or a power outage or something like that. Losing power for a week is difficult, right? Like, people don't want to go without power. And it's often, there's two bills that people pay. It's their cell phone and their power, because you don't want either of those things shut off. You can go a while without paying some other bills before it catches up to you, but those two are pretty important.
I would agree. So as we move towards the finish line here, Nate, I want to turn it over to you. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you feel you want to put some final emphasis on or wrap up before we move on to you sharing your best place for people to find you?
No, I think we covered it all. For me, it's about not only cleaner, cheaper power, but it's being able to deploy it at scale. And because that's really what we need right now. We're just getting outpaced by too many, again, back to the China example. They should be concerning and alarming. They're building 8 times the power that we are. And we've just created so much red tape around any new source of generation, and not just solar, across the board, that it makes it very difficult to meet the power demands. And I think everyone should be concerned by that. Anecdote: we had a winter peak in Florida, and I posted just a snapshot of what Duke sent me, and I think it was one of the most engaged LinkedIn posts I've ever had. You don't think of Florida using more power in the winter. Like I could take this a couple different directions, and it was between 5 and 9, but they also have programs where you can have a battery and they'll pay you if you just use your power from your battery. So you're taking off the grid. And then once you're out of that danger zone, so to speak, you can start using power from the grid again and recharge your battery with solar or however you want to accomplish that. And I think there's a lot of ways that it's not just solar. We need all of these technologies, and we need them all working together with a smart grid to be able to handle the peaks that we're seeing. But yeah, to have a winter peak in Florida is pretty wild. And I think you're going to see more of that. We're going to have areas like in PJM. When you think of like Pennsylvania having a rolling blackout, it's not usually what people would suspect, especially in, a state that has so much gas and coal. I think PJM's been flashing warning signs about the capacity and how they have to get new generation to come online in order to keep up with the demand, which is increasing rapidly. And like I said, that's one of the first times in history where we've seen that demand increase in the US.
Last question for you. Are you optimistic that the US are going to be able to make this transition, or are we going to get caught flat-footed? We're already kind of behind based on the facts that you kind of dropped here, but the demands are growing. Do you think we are going to be resilient enough and forward-thinking to catch up?
I think that's America's greatest asset. I think innovation, and we talked a lot about AI and how AI can help innovate. And that's not the end all be all. And just to be clear, like AI is not necessarily replacing jobs. Like it's not good. Obviously, you're going to have somebody on the roof installing that. And even my reviewers, like they won't be replaced. They'll be more efficient. Right. So I believe in American ingenuity, and I think that we'll continue to solve this problem. It's whack-a-mole. They're solving a problem over here, and this one's just rearing its head. And as soon as it comes up and people recognize, wow, this is a problem, I should have been paying attention to it. We pay attention to it because that's what we do. It's our industry, right? But the average person, until they see that utility bill continue to rise, they're not thinking a whole lot of it. They're thinking about, what are their other problems, or, traffic, or, whatever it is, grocery prices, things of that nature. And it's not until it's going to be a problem where people will innovate around it. Now, obviously, we're trying to get ahead of that, and we want to be positioned for that transition. But I think, overall, I'm very optimistic about the future, specifically as it equates to energy in the US. I just think that we have a wave coming, and people need to start getting prepared for that wave.
Nate, I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for being here and sharing it. And I think Rise Capital is very uniquely positioned to take advantage of that wave, but really take advantage of it from a financial point of view, but also being able to create real value for people and transition them into cheaper energy sources for long-term sustainability. And I would even say, security, national security matters, right? The more independent, the more resilient, the more diverse we can be, it's going to be better for when real big challenges come along. So super enjoyed the conversation. Before I let you go, please share with the audience where they can get a hold of you. If they want to learn more about Raise Capital, how did they do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Nathan Jovanelly or Nate Jovanelly. I can't remember which one's on there, but or you can look up SunRaise Capital, www.sunraisecapital.com. There's a form there to get in touch with me, or you can put my email in the podcast notes if you want. It's nate@sunraisecapital.com. So always interested in talking to installers, potential investors, even homeowners, like what they would like to see. We try and build our solution around unifying those three because of I think there's generally a misalignment of interest a lot of times, and it's not specific to solar, but in a lot of industries, and that's the gap we're trying to solve.
Fantastic. All right, to our audience, if you've enjoyed the conversations, make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, share with somebody that needs to know about SunRaise and their unique value proposition. Once again, Nate, thank you for being on the podcast. We appreciate you and wishing you all an amazing day. This has been another episode of Blue Ocean Solutions Podcast. Take care.